Video games are an art form, from the gameplay to the visuals to the music, which I made a whole video about if you want to check that out later. But today, I want to look at games from a visual perspective. Like movies and television, video games use the visual medium to explore concepts and evoke feelings. And 360 no scope your homie, get wrecked! But unlike TV and cinema, games are interactive, and you as a player have control over what you will see and where you will go within the environments, which means that everything that is possible to see in the game has to be rendered and fleshed out. Unlike a show where only what the director is showing you has to be made, which is why movie sets can look like this, and games can't. Because of this, there's a ton of work that goes into designing a game, stuff that you as a player may not even care to think about, but the developer probably had sleepless nights over. I love using this parallel between films and games, because just like TV shows or movies, games evolved over time with new technology. Films were once only in black and white and had to use a ton of practical effects, but these limitations didn't make them worse. In fact, some of these films still hold up today in spite of these limitations. These films were still able to transport us to a new world, or to the future, and they are appreciated as art by most people. The same applies to games. Games at one point didn't have too much room for creative expression. I mean, Pong was literally just this. Even a game as basic as Donkey Kong made some very unique stylistic choices. Choices as simple as color, what your character wears, putting eyes on these fireballs. None of these choices seem like a big deal, but they are what the developers had to think about and knew they would eventually matter for their game to stick the landing and have an impact. Game developers also had limited space in their games, and I mean limited. The original Super Mario Bros. Was 31 kilobytes. Not megabytes, not gigabytes, kilobytes. Think about it. The whole entire game fit in that much space. So Miyamoto, the game developer for Super Mario Bros., had to compress a lot of these files. You ever notice how the Goombas look like mushrooms? That wasn't an accident. That was to save space in the files. And there are a ton of things like that in the game. But even within these limitations, you can look at this and appreciate it still in 2022. It's a masterpiece in game design, and its aesthetic is iconic. From the design of Mario, who's this red plumber guy, to these green pipes, to the enemy designs. All these were choices that Miyamoto made. And given the limited technology that they had, it's incredible to see a lot of these characters come to life now in 3D models. Like, here's what a Goomba looked like when it first started, and look at it now. And this isn't me saying that all games are these beautiful works of art. Not all movies are either. For every Super Mario Bros., we got a crappy NES movie tie-in game. But I can't help but appreciate what a developer like Miyamoto was able to pull off in 1985. As technology progressed, games were made bigger and better, but they didn't always look better. Games in 2D looked great because they limited the scope of what players needed to see, going from left to right, most of these being side-scrollers like Mario and Sonic. But as games made it into the third dimension, gaming's limited hardware would be front and center. Character models were blocky and polygonal, and they just didn't look right. It was the most apparent with human characters like Lara Croft or James Bond. Games were fun to play, but aesthetically aged like milk. The technology just wasn't there yet, and the games suffered for it visually. But even then, games like Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Crash Bandicoot, and Sonic Adventure managed to give us a whole world to explore. Never before did we have the ability to just go where we wanted to go. It was a whole new way to game, and a whole new experience. Developers had to basically design every tree, every river, the sky, all these things that they didn't have to worry about before, now just became part of the job. It's a big reason why these games are still loved. The gameplay, the world, and the stories that they told. It felt like we were being transported into that world, kind of like how we feel transported when watching a really good movie. It didn't matter how weird these character models looked because you're having fun. However, some games understood this limitation, and they somehow managed to pull off looking cool back then and still look good now. Jet Set Radio understood this very well. They knew the models wouldn't look clean, but they used a combination of cell shading and super unique character design to make a game that visually holds up over 20 years later. The entire world pops with color and style that feels futuristic and funky. While this cel-shaded style was used partially to mask the limitations of the hardware, it no doubt inspired future games' art style, and we saw underrated games like Okami and Beautiful Joe use this style to great effect, and games way later down the line like Borderlands do this also very successfully. But as technology kept progressing, games wanted their graphics to look more and more real. The first-person shooter genre really leaned into this the most. It makes sense why shooters really cared about graphics. They wanted the player to feel like a soldier in World War II, and games like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty captured this. But it wasn't until Call of Duty 4 where this gritty realism and amazing graphics shocked the world. From attempting to assassinate a terrorist leader to witnessing your character dying to a nuclear bomb, video games have come a long way from their pixelated days. They have become so immersive and visceral that it's beginning to blend more and more with real life, and causing more and more conflicts with real life. Back in the day, you had games like Mortal Kombat, which, I mean, look at this. Can you believe that this was banned by a Congress? Video games have come a long way. Now you have a game where you're realistically shooting people. I will note that there is no scientific study linking video game violence to real life violence, and anyone that thinks so is a grifter and stupid as hell. Just wanted to lay that out there. This shift into realistic graphics and more immersive gameplay is even more apparent in horror games, where you as a player have agency to get away from a monster or die to it. It's such a different experience than just watching a horror movie and getting jump scared, since you are the person that's being terrorized and you're the only person that can get yourself out of it. But just because a game has good graphics, it doesn't mean that the game is good or beautiful or should be considered high art. There's like 16 Assassin's Creeds and all these other open world Ubisoft type beat games that, while they look really real, they're not the best experiences. And so a lot of games, especially indie titles, have been embracing old school art styles like Undertale and Deltarune or Shovel Knight, or they straight up don't even care how the style looks because their style is simplicity, like Among Us or Fall Guys, or the most popular game in the world, Minecraft, and to a lesser extent, Roblox. Both of these games have allowed for the players to show off their own creativity if they are just given the freedom and the tools to do so. If that's not art, I don't know what else is. Or they've leaned heavily into a more cartoonish style on purpose because they understand that making things more cartoony doesn't necessarily mean it looks bad. It can actually look even better than real life games like Overwatch or all the new Mario games. And with the future release of Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, which is essentially the spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio Future, you can see that there's a lot of hype behind this old school style because all of these developers have embraced what has been the most important part about the gaming experience all along: the gameplay. And as we hit 2022, games have reached new heights in their styles, both graphically and gameplay-wise, making vast landscapes and open worlds look more beautiful than ever. You can see the tiniest hair follicles on Mario's head, or see the pores on Aloy's face. So now that game technology has gotten to the point where realism has been achieved, VR is looking like the next frontier, the final evolution in the immersive gaming experience. Not only are you controlling the character, but you're controlling the character in almost every single way. I could spend this whole video going through every game and what they did to stand out aesthetically, from Hades to Apex Legends to Fortnite, but you don't want to be here all day. If you're wondering, macro, what's the point? The point is, video games are art, and their presentation matters just as much as their gameplay. I think a lot of modern AAA developers think that the better the graphics are and the more realistic the game looks, then therefore it's going to be a better game. But you'll notice that a lot of the best games in the modern era haven't necessarily even had the best graphics. They had a very unique art style and design aesthetic that suited their game and helped them stand out from the rest, because the game's developer took the tools that they had and made a masterpiece, the same way a painter would, through the character design, the world design, and how those characters and that world interacts with you, the player. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later.